learn about what the opportunities are for them to decarbonise in different ways. We talk about skills, we talk about training, we talk about how to attract inward investment. And we've made those quite open structures so that new organisations can join. And they are turning into a vehicle for influencing the direction of development within a region, which is fantastic to see. And then, of course, we have our Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, which many of you are associated with, and it's great to see you here today. So this is quite another big investment we've made on trying to bring academia and industry much closer together. So there have always been links between industry and academics in the past. I've seen many of them, participated in many of them myself. And what you can always see is that for the duration of the programme, it's all very fine. And then when the programme's over, we go back to square one. What we're really trying to do here is create a community of academics who actually care about decarbonising industry, really care about it. And that is absolutely what we want to try and achieve more than anything else, and that we get the relationship with industry, understand what their problems are, and start working on resolving those problems, because the absolute crucial thing we have to do in the UK is get the costs of decarbonising the whole UK and the world down, and that's what we're going to do through development of new approaches, which is where the IDRIC Research Centre comes in. So we've got projects all around the UK where the blobs are mainly. Orange projects are cluster plans. Interestingly, we have one project which is not associated with offshore carbon capture and storage type projects, and that's in the Black Country. They are looking at a whole range of different sorts of decarbonisation options and opening up ideas about how we might decarbonise non-coastal regions in the future. And then the green ones are our deployment projects, and then all underpinned by the research centre at the bottom. This is our way of doing things in the UK, and it's working really well, but I just wanted to make sure you understand that actually we want to have influence internationally as well. So what we can see is that 2 of our industry clusters are already part of the World Economic Forum drive to develop net zero clusters around the globe, and playing a huge role in thinking on carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. And what's coming next? We put such a lot of emphasis on knowledge sharing. We see the research programme as a really important way of driving that. And then we want to look at what more can an industrial cluster deliver. And we're going to talk about people and place on the panel in a moment, so I won't do that now. Thank you very much.
Decided not to sit in a line because we felt it would be a bit awkward, but we're just going to be doing lots of jumping up and down instead. But that's fine, it's good for our blood pressure and things. So Kirstie, over to you, thank you. Hello everyone, you're all very spread out, so I'm hoping I'll be able to reach you all. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Morning, I'm Kirstie Simpson, I'm the Deputy Dean of the Business School at the University of Chester. And it's really great to be able to talk to you all today and to see all your eager faces in front of us, trying to understand a little bit more about industrial decarbonisation and what role you can play. So hopefully as part of the conversation this morning, you'll actually feel like you become a part of what we're trying to do. I've got 3 key takeaways for you this morning. So if you remember nothing else, I've no slides, so you're going to have to absorb this. These 3 key takeaways, you're going to have to absorb them. So the first one, I'm going to talk to you today about skills. Very briefly, I've got 7 minutes, probably 5 minutes and counting now. So I'm going to talk to you about skills. 3 key takeaways. The skills challenge in relation to industrial decarbonisation is a very, very real challenge. Brian has already talked about the word challenge. It is a significant challenge in relation to skills. There is debate about how sizable that challenge is, and we'll maybe explore that a little bit through the course of this morning. The skills challenge starts from a position of inequity. And other colleagues will talk this morning a little bit more about the just transition, and that again is something that I think we might need to explore. And the final takeaway in relation to skills is that the time for action is right now. We all need to be engaging in this debate about how we secure the workforce in an equitable and inclusive way for industrial decarbonisation. Otherwise, it will not happen in the way that we would like it to, in the time that we need it to. So they're my three key takeaways. So just to expand a little bit, and in relation to your roles as early career researchers, I think there are significant opportunities in research in the areas that I'm going to talk about very quickly now, particularly in relation to the opportunities, in relation to training needs within educational establishments, but also within private training provision, barriers to individual and organisational development, and then realistic action. So I think there are research opportunities in all four of those areas. So Bryony outlined the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. The University of Chester is involved in 3 Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge projects, circa 600k. So the first one we're involved with is in HyNet, which is one of the deployment projects. And our studies were focused on workforce development and socio-economic impact of the project. That really started our skills journey, I guess, in relation to our understanding of what skills are required and the scope and the scale, actually, of the skills that will be required for industrial decarbonisation. That allowed us to understand more about the HyNet geography, because the HyNet geography is relatively specific, and trying to connect that then with how we could enable the HyNet project to facilitate growth development in some of the poorest parts of Cheshire. Because the HyNet project runs through, I don't know how many of you are from the northwest, but the HyNet project goes through a particular part of Cheshire, Ellesmere Port. Any nods in the audience? Everybody know where that is? But that's a particularly poor part of the region with some particularly poor educational outcomes. But the HyNet project has got the opportunity to transform those communities. Question mark. In relation to cluster plan, we're involved in the Northwest Cluster Plan project, and our reports there were around recommendations and working with stakeholders. And the first part of that, the recommendations report, evidenced that there's lots of studies out there on the skills that we need. How we will deliver them is the problem. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for those of you who are interested in this area to get involved. In relation to IDRIC, our study focused on the national workforce. And we've estimated that through the capex required for industrial decarbonisation, which by 2050 will be around 350 billion, we estimate that that equals 365,000 jobs per year up to 2050. 365,000. Not all new jobs, some new jobs, but also upskill, reskill of the current workforce. That is no mean feat. So, I've got 1 minute left. Hopefully you can remember the 3 key takeaways. But from my position, having undertaken all that work, we know that leadership is really important. Anybody can be a leader. You are leaders in your field. You are neophyte leaders. You need to start to develop your research to become that leader in this field, to establish what we need, which are more individuals in the industrial decarbonisation that can take this area forward. One of the key difficulties in skills development is a lot of the skills that we will require will be in construction. I suspect most of you aren't involved in construction. Your research is different to that, but that's where the skills will be. So we need to raise the value of those types of skills, because otherwise industrial decarbonisation, your interest in that will not develop, because we won't be able to take it any further forward. So everybody is equal in this, and hopefully when we talk a bit more about the just transition, some of those elements of the skills area that we need to start to think about will be about equity, inclusion and diversity. So summarise, 3 key takeaways. I'll just very quickly go through those. Skills challenge is real. We know that through the work that we've done. It starts from a position of inequity, and I think the next presentations are around the just transition, so that will start to elucidate that a little bit more. But the time for action is now. We can all lead in this field. We are all developing skills for industrial decarbonisation, however direct or indirect that might be. So I think I'm handing over now to Rachel. Yeah? We're tag team. Rachel's coming on, I'm coming off. And happy to answer any questions at the panel very shortly. Come on. Come on down.
Right, so that's me. So I'm Rachel Bray. I'm a research associate at the University of Strathclyde. I do work a little bit with Jen Roberts, and we'll be working with her a lot more in the new year. But today I wanted to talk to you about a research project that I've been working on for the last 2 years with Dr. Rebecca Ford at Strathclyde. So our aim with this project was to take academic research and make it applicable to policy and decision makers in practical ways to further their understanding and implementation of a just transition. So what is a just transition? We started this project with an academic literature review and interviews with 12 leading academics who study justice. However, we found that if you ask 12 academics what a just transition means to them, you'll get 12 very different answers, which isn't particularly helpful when you're trying to explain the concept to a non-academic audience. But essentially, the just transition concept was born out of international trade union movements and takes into account the rights of the workforce throughout the transition period and encourages the creation of decent work and quality jobs. It also maintains that the burden of climate action should not be borne unequally by one set of workers or communities or any one country. However, the just transition concept today can be seen as being much wider than its original workforce roots and can now encompass the transition of the whole of society over time from one that is extractive and unsustainable to one that is regenerative and more sustainable. And it's this wider definition of a just transition that we used through our project. So who is responsible for delivering a just transition? We found that in order to achieve this broader whole of society transition, many stakeholders needed to take action in whatever capacity they had to act. So we found it's not a top-down process, it's not a bottom-up process, it's not middle-out, it's everyone working in whatever sphere of influence they have to work in. So essentially, everyone's responsible. So we took the academic learning that we'd made and we translated it into a framework that could be used by decision makers to explore the justice implications of their net zero visions, strategies, policies, and plans. And the framework is based on 4 tenets of energy justice, which can be found in the academic literature. So that's the blue segments on the left: distributional justice, recognition justice, procedural justice, restorative justice. And we've also added 4 additional dimensions to take a whole systems approach to a just transition. So that's over time. Transition is an ongoing process and will change over time. It will happen at different scales. International, national, regional, and local dimensions all need to be considered. And so decisions will look differently according to the scale that you're looking at. Along supply chains, thinking of international supply chains, and also about developing local supply chains, and across power structures and hierarchies. Transition gives us the opportunity to change the current status quo and develop better ways of operating the energy system. So in our framework approach, we have these 8 different dimensions, and under each of these dimensions, we pose a set of questions for decision makers to consider when developing policies and strategies or embarking on new energy projects. So we wanted to ensure that our framework would work in different arenas, so we undertook 4 initial case studies. Glasgow Community Energy, which is a community energy group working within deprived neighbourhoods in Glasgow. Local Energy Scotland, looking at their community energy policy. With the DNO, SSEN, looking at a specific strategy that they were developing at the time. And with Repowering London, looking at their working procedures. And then we presented the case studies and the framework to MSPs at Holyrood in March of this year. Final slide. And then over this summer, we've been working with Scottish Power, and we've been benchmarking their original just transition strategy against a range of international just transition strategies. And then we applied the points framework to ensure that we challenged them on their thinking and widened their approach. And this is their brand new just transition strategy, which was launched a week ago today. So what we've learned through this project is that many organisations want to act on justice, but at present they don't know how to. And that's why this type of framework has been useful in the absence of any official just transition metrics from the UK government.
Rachel, I'm going to get you to come straight back up again. So what I'm going to do, just because of time, and I want to make sure that we're prioritising the discussion and the breakouts, I'm not going to say very much. So I'm going to basically just cancel my talk, which is nice, I can cancel myself. So can I get Kirstie, Bryony and Rachel back up again? Oh, next one. Sit, please. Sorry, I'm distracted by tech. There we go. Okay, brilliant. So if we sit here and we've got a microphone between us, we'll share that along. What I'm going to do is a couple of Kickstarter questions, and then I'm going to hand over to the floor. I'd really like to hear your views. So if you do have a question for the panel, we've got a roaming mic. Charlotte's ready, so I think we just, yeah. But I'm going to do a Kickstarter just now. I'm going to sit down alongside you. So I think that was really helpful, Rachel, to hear that kind of that framework, the breaking down what just transition means. If we now apply this to the industrial decarbonisation challenge, maybe use the example of thinking about one of the clusters and think about, well, what does just transition mean, or just transition principles mean within the kind of an example. I don't mean to take a particular case study, I just mean in the case of an imaginary cluster, actually let's break down, what do we mean when we're talking about just transition? What sort of things are we talking about on the ground, as it were? So I'm going to start with Kirstie.
Thank you. So from my perspective and from the research that we've undertaken, just transition, and I'd already alluded to it, I think, in my very brief overview, for our communities in the Northwest, it's enabling individuals, young people, older people, to actually engage with industrial decarbonisation in a way that, for me, means that they're able to become part of a skilled workforce. So there are other parts of the just transition, of course, but from my perspective, from a skills perspective, it's enabling individuals to be able to reach their potential. So, for example, in Ellesmere Port, we know that there are individuals in that locality who are less likely to achieve grade C in English and maths. They're less likely to be employed when they finish school. How can those individuals be enabled to form part of the workforce for industrial decarbonisation? Because that is happening on their doorstep. And therefore, in the medium term, yes, the incentive, the catalyst now is industrial decarbonisation. But in the medium to longer term, those individuals become part of a meaningful economy in that local area, which means that the whole area is given an opportunity, not just those individuals. So for me, it's specifically oriented in skills, but obviously colleagues will be considering other perspectives.
I don't quite know how to answer this actually, because I slightly struggle with the just transition implementation concept. I think totally support it, of course, I would one not. But what I do see is that, people seem to be starting to use that as an excuse to not decarbonise. It's not going to be fair to this community because we might lose these jobs, or we might create more jobs if we do it in a different way. And I think what we have to do is keep at the heart that we have to, for the planet's survival, decarbonise industry and other things in the UK. And of course we have to do it in the right way, but I do get a bit nervous about people focusing on the just transition and then using it as an excuse to not do the right thing from a CO2 reduction point of view. So I slightly, a lot of things play out in ways that you don't expect, don't they? And I think, the more I see from interactions, it's just that kind of big concern. But of course, totally supportive of the idea. And I think what we can see in industry clusters is at least more conversations on things like ED&I happening. I think it's not necessarily actual change yet, but it's discussions about things that were never talked about before and that people are quite uncomfortable talking about. May I go on a bit longer, so I'm talking too long now. When we kicked off the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, we asked all of the entrants into the competition to talk to us about their approach to ED&I and knowledge sharing. And we asked them to write a written response, and then we took them through in an interview, and we made this one of the main questions that we asked the competition entrants, and we cared about it. But what we could see is an enormous number of companies that should know better saying, we've got a policy, and it's really great that Scottish Power have got a just transition policy, but what we've got to do is make these things real. So I think what I'm hoping for is that we don't just have policies and talk about it, that people get more used to having these conversations and it just becomes a real thing. So we are trying to help with that, but it's a long road, isn't it?
Just to come back on that very briefly, I absolutely agree. And one of the challenges for industry particularly is the motivation of commercial profit. And so it's that commercial argument against doing things right or doing the right thing. And I think that's where the difficulty is, because these projects need to happen on time and in good order. And they haven't always got the time, from my perspective, in relation to skills, to invest in the community to develop the skills that they will need. So my concern is that skilled workforce will simply be imported because we haven't got the time to do it any other way.
You touched on absolutely loads of points there around, actually what is the bottom line, and actually how do you deliver, and also the fact that people often forget about the transition piece. Just the just piece, and actually we're talking a just transition. Rachel, I'd like to hear your perspective here as well, and maybe thinking about some of the wider co-benefits that transition might bring on a local area as well. If you can speak to that.
I just wanted to start by following on from what you said, Kirstie. At the moment, organisations don't have to produce a just transition strategy. There are no metrics. It's very voluntary if you do one or not. So as I said in my presentation, I benchmarked Scottish Power's strategy against a range of international ones, and I couldn't find that many. Even internationally, I couldn't find that many. So, I had to look beyond that. And we found that companies do want to do the right thing, but how do they go about it? So your question, sorry, co-benefits. I've been very much looking into skills development, and that on-the-job training, the moving up, the reskilling, it's keeping the workforce that want to go with you. and giving them the opportunities, but it's also training all the way through from primary school, secondary school upwards, that those skills are valued. And it might not all be about university education, it's about vocational training, on-the-job training, apprenticeships, and giving those career pathways more of a proactive stance, so that it's not, you're only the best of the best if you go to university. We do need all of those skills in place.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think just so I've got this kind of weird role as a panel convener and also a speaker. But if I can add in a couple of thoughts as well, then I do want to hand over. Is thinking about actually the end goal here is decarbonisation. It's about cleaning up our air. Bryony talked about the kind of integration, fit to circular economy, demand reduction. This all allows better or greater opportunity for that place orientated co-benefits. It's not always directly related to that industrial decarbonisation particular infrastructure. And of course, the more economy thrives and there's more investment into that local area, that local economy, so the feeling of the place changes as well. And so as I guess there's an aspect here that I don't have time to ask you about, but I think is important to consider is that a just transition is about process and it's about outcomes. And I think there's a process and outcomes part that you absolutely highlighted, Rachel. And I think there's some questions around how does that come into the decision-making and planning currently to allow for this transformation that's going to occur in these areas, or to actually, to deliver on those other aspirations at that local and regional level. But I wanted to make sure that I dedicated 10 minutes for wider discussion from the floor. So there was definitely one question or two questions there. So we'll go there to start with, and then to the front. Let's take them in turn, actually, just because otherwise it's a bit much. But when you speak, if you could introduce yourself as well, that'd be lovely to know who you are.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Gilani, and I am a research fellow in decarbonisation at the University of Leeds. Can I please ask finally if there's an intention to create a policy to decarbonise dispersed sites?
Well, I think the answer is that the government's very well aware that dispersed sites need to be decarbonised, and they have not been forgotten about. Things will be happening, I'm confident of that. And the reason why we're focusing on clusters first is that's the easy win, but everything needs to be addressed, and it will be.
Thank you. Okay, next question.
Hello, my name's Jenny Hancock, and I'm from the University of Sheffield. I'm, working with the Translational Energy Research Centre. And you talked about the amount of funding that's required for the industrial clusters. But if you take into account, let's say, the 210 million from the UK government, plus 500 million from industries, that amounts to maybe 710 million. But they've predicted that the scale of CCS alone for offshore is probably going to be the equivalent amount of investment required for the North Sea petroleum industry. And I think I can safely assume that that's more than 710 million. So where is the rest of that money going to come from? And then post 2025, the government has basically planned that the tailing of this funding that's provided is going to be tailing off anyway. So and that's only, 3 years away, if that now. So it just doesn't seem like, whilst what you're saying is like really nice, it just doesn't seem very realistic, to be honest. And so I was just wondering if you might be able to build on the picture of that a little bit. And then I do have a sub question, but yeah, I don't want to take anyone else's time. So.
I suppose the quick answer to your question is I think you're wrong, but a slightly longer answer, I feel very optimistic about the direction of government funding in this area. So we've seen over the last 2 years a commitment to decarbonise at least 4 of these clusters. that means a major government investment is coming, because that's part of government policy now. It's been written, it's in strategies. And we've already seen the announcement of the next £1 billion. 2 of our UK clusters have been allocated, in effect, that money, and then more money is coming. It's going to take time, but industry is recognising that this is a big business opportunity for the UK as well, so industry is standing ready to invest too. So I feel quite optimistic, but we could perhaps talk about it more at the break.
It's a really important question to be asking, and Bryony, you mentioned you want to create this community of academics that care, that really care and scrutinise, that ask these key questions. So yeah, thank you. So the other question was here at the front, and I just want to check at this point, is there any other questions in the room? Here. Okay, so I'll come to you next.
Helen, I'm from the University of Nottingham and I'm a PhD student. My question to you is, do you think there is to an extent a barrier in terms of the language that's being used? Because obviously in industry you talk about decarbonisation, but a lot of industry relies on carbon as its sort of source for the products, like it is in a lot of products. Do you think there would be more uptake in terms of sort of transitioning from, I guess, a more fossil-based economy to a more renewable economy if there was a better understanding in terms of how, I guess, it should happen almost? Because I think when you sort of say we're going to decarbonise, you almost take out a key ingredient in what industry needs.
It's a really good question, actually. That comes down to the language, right? And what does decarbonisation mean to different groups? Another aspect of that that I was going to talk about earlier was that learned recently that in Australia we don't use the word just transition anymore, because transition, although for you, Rachel, you said it meant there's a clear direction of going from and to somewhere. There it's from and then it's closing. So the transition for them is closing down sectors, and so they're now saying transformation because that keeps the sector alive or at least the perceptions of the sector alive. So I think that's kind of interesting, that language piece there. Does anybody want to speak to that decarbonisation language or framing?
Not specifically in relation to industry, but I do think you have a very good point, particularly in my view, from industry to the community. And actually we all understanding what we mean when we're talking this language, because it is quite a specific language, isn't it? It's quite a scientific language, and you'll be aware of that in the work that you do. You'll understand the work that you do. But when you try to translate that, and I use that word specifically, to the local community and to enable them to see the value, which connects back to just transition or transformation, because we all need to be understanding the purpose of this work, don't we? Which is decarbonisation. It's making our world a better place. So how do we enable that to happen? Because we are probably all speaking different languages, even in this room, metaphorically.
Yes, actually, Bryony, you started your talk by saying the challenge is not just a metaphorical challenge, it is also a thing, so there's those aspects there. But I guess what's key is that if you think of how, so there's the names of these kind of policies or structures, but there's also actually how you then communicate that to stakeholders and to different stakeholders. And actually, I don't often see decarbonisation being used. I see the cleaning up, and that might be because of research on that's effective, or it might just be used like that's an effective communication tool. And I know that there's been really interesting and useful research in recent years about that narrative, about how do you make the political narrative, what are those stories and the framing that you need to take for these different aspects of decarbonisation, because there's not one decarbonisation, there's multiple, isn't there? So the next question was over here. I want to give you this microphone. It's there.
Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm from the University of Bath. And I guess my question is quite a kind of broad and big question, but I can note down. I think it's quite hard to talk about this without thinking about democracy and power structures in the UK. In my personal experience, and a lot of people agree with this, there's a lot of communities that have been left out in the past, and I personally don't have a lot of hope in our political system. I think research about what kind of steps we need to take, community engagement and things like that is all really useful. But do we have the legislation in place? Can we hold our politicians to account? And I don't know. Yeah, I'm just curious.
That's fantastic, and actually was exactly one of the questions I wanted to ask. Is actually like, how do you, it's about how does local people and place come into the decision-making process? How does it influence? Does anybody want to take that question? It's a difficult one.
I feel like I should, but perhaps I could just start it off and then someone else can take it from there. I 100% agree with you. It is difficult. We've just got to try and make it work that, people do have a voice, and, people need to sound clear, but come together in projects and, saying what they want for their community and what they want from different projects. I don't really know where I'd go. Sorry.
One of the things I was specifically curious about is if you think there could be any legislation changes. It's not actually my background, I'm an engineer, but I'm curious about it. It's interesting to see some of the cases that have been brought against the government in terms of the policies that are put into place don't fit with their own net zero climate change act. So I'm wondering if you do things like that. I don't know if that's something.
Like I'm turning into a politician myself because I probably can't really answer the question you asked, but I do think that, obviously some of those changes have been extraordinarily effective, and that is really requiring people to have facts rather than opinions, that they can back up, and that's what's so important, rather than just doing it on an emotional basis. I suppose, building on what Rachel's already said though, and I still feel that trying to change the world as part of decarbonisation is a bit of a big ask, but we can change some things. So what I have found really quite effective is, I've just been involved in the selection of the first projects that will get the chance to have government support for hydrogen production in the UK. And we have talked to them about EDI. That's one of the questions we asked again, because I'm quite keen to do that. And then I've done face-to-face feedback with all of the people who got through to the final round. I'm still involved in that. Had a horrible month talking to people about why they were not successful in their proposal. It's not much fun. But when you talk to them about this whole area and say, actually, if we're developing a new hydrogen industry in the UK, we haven't got one now, this is our chance to do something different, and you are not seizing that chance, and that is not what we want for you. We want you to do something different. We can't make them do it, but we can at least just keep talking about it's important, it's our one chance to run the hydrogen business in a different way. And so it's kind of wishful thinking, but I think if we all keep that sort of message in mind, and that we do have a voice and we can change things locally, that's the best we can do. But whether we ultimately have much impact. You said you haven't got much confidence in the political system,
So I think that there are some things, I've got like a minute, and I want to invite a close-out statement for everyone. But I think this is where the role of local authorities can be absolutely key and critical, like really key. I'm very happy to talk to you about some of the policies that are happening in Scotland as well. But I think some of the issues are summed up at a conference recently. There was this presentation where there was a conversation around there's a need to embed community needs and priorities earlier in the decision making. And then a developer stood up and said, well, how do we do that when we haven't announced our project yet? And that sums up, I think, some of the issues that are at stake here and that need to be resolved fast in terms of process. So we've run out of time, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask for just a close-out statement from each of you. If there's any final thing you wanted to say that you haven't said yet, or one of the key issues that you think around industrial decarbonisation, people in place. If you haven't prepped you for this, so I'm putting you on the spot, but that's okay. Even if it's one word, that's fine. So I'll start with you, Rachel, if that's okay.
Yeah, give me the least amount of time to think about it. I'm really sorry, but I'm probably going to pinch what you're going to say, so we'll have to say it twice.
Okay.
Skills and skills. Training the workforce that we already have, and training the future workforce, and making sure that they have those decent jobs available in decarbonisation.
Now, I would add to that, people are the most important part of this for me. Skills, yes, but in an equitable, diverse and inclusive way, because that's an additional challenge to the people part.
People and place, I think, we're increasingly seeing that these are important. I think a few years ago we kind of waffled on about it's all important, but actually it's proving to be really important. So that's what I would say, it's a really great area for academic research, because we waffle on about a lot of things that might be done, but actually what the right way to go is not all that clear to me. So.
The practice, the doing stuff in practice. And if I might add, my tuppence, I suppose, it's around, I'm 2 minutes over, it's around that current way of doing things. The current workforce has deep inequalities and inequities. And if we're going to transition and grow new sectors, we need to ensure that transition, that growth is actually an inclusive one that takes everyone with them and has access, equal access, or at least better access, because what we don't want to do, that we grow these sectors maintaining the current inequalities, then we're not going to get the transition we need, and neither will be just. That's my closing statement. So I just want to thank the panel so much for your thoughts and reflections. We could have talked a lot longer. I'm very sorry that I overran, but I'm going to hand over now. Say thank you and hand over to Charlotte. So thank you.
Yes, I would just also like to reiterate what Jen says and thank the panelists. I thought that was a really engaging, a really interesting panel session, and looking really at the heart. I think from my take, this is the first transition that we will put people at the centre of the decision-making process, and that's so important to discuss as well. So it's been great to hear from our panelists, but we want you to discuss. There's so much expertise in this room. You're working in your own specific area towards this challenge, and we want to hear your perspective on industrial decarbonisation as well. So we're going to have a little bit of a workshop. I'm going to speak to the people joining us online. We will put you into breakout rooms. We have someone here that is about to do that. And the questions that we're going to be posing will appear in the chat box as well, so that we want you to answer. We'll then bring you back into the room about 5 minutes before the end of the session for the wrap up. But if you have any questions, we have someone on hand to answer those. So please just put them in the chat box. So hopefully we've all scattered them into breakout rooms now. And for everyone joining us in the room, we would like you to all sit into tables of maybe 5 or 6. There are some paper and pens on these tables, so please do write down those notes. We can take them away and capture what you've discussed today. If possible, we'll use those stickers on your badges again. They all represent different centres that you are affiliated with or you identify with. Try and make sure that we're having a table with as many different centres as possible. That sort of collaboration across centres is very important. And yeah, just have a very quick introduction. We'll give you sort of 3 or 4 minutes to get into tables of 5 or 6 and to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with the first task. Okay, thank you. Okay. So hopefully you've all managed to introduce yourself, but don't worry, there will be some time to do that in the next few minutes as well. So what we want you to discuss is, we want your perspective. You know, we've heard what some of the key challenges are from our panel, but we want your perspective on what you think those non-technical challenges are for industrial decarbonisation. So we want you to discuss in your groups. We're going to give you 7 minutes. That should say 7 minutes. There we go. So we want to give you just 7 minutes just to highlight what you think from your perspective, from your research, what those challenges might be. So I'll start the timer now. These timers. Just under a minute left. I should have got the countdown clock, but unfortunately that's the time up. And it's been brilliant to hear all the hub, the discussion that's going on in the room, and there's plenty more time for that in the next couple of challenges. What we want you to know, change the slide, please. Just as that's coming up, what we want you to now discuss is looking at those challenges that you have raised at your tables. How do you think they could or should be resolved? What we want you to consider is there a body already that has this coordination, or is there a need to develop more central coordination in the challenges that you have already raised? And is that from a top-down perspective or a bottom-up perspective as well? So we're going to give you 10 minutes to discuss this. Hopefully the timer will work this time. And yeah, fire on, please. Thank you. Can I also just a reminder just to note down some of your discussions as well? There's some paper there in the middle of the table. Just 30 more seconds. Okay, well, again, lots of discussion there, and we're delighted that we're going to capture everything that you've been discussing. I see you all have written it down, which is excellent. So we are going to capture that as centres, IDRIC and UKCCSRC as well. So the final question that we want you to ask and discuss as a table is, we've heard from Kirstie about this sort of the size of the challenge when it comes to skill development and capacity of the workforce that we'll need for industrial decarbonisation, but also some of the other net zero, these huge big infrastructure projects as well. And we want to ask you, how could you as researchers help to address some of the challenges around skill development, training, and public engagement? How do we get more people on board with industrial decarbonisation? How do we highlight to these hard to reach communities what the benefits are for industrial decarbonisation, and also what some of the career pathways are, so that we can help to address those skill gaps. So we want you to sort of assess what are the barriers to this, and how could us as research centres take what you have said, how can we support you to undertake some of these tasks as well, so we can take that back and put together the resources that you may need. So we're going to give you 8 minutes for this, and then we're going to very, very quickly wrap up. Okay, if we can start wrapping up those discussions now. Fantastic. Well, for those aware of the time, we are 10 minutes over, but as we started late, we wanted you to really have those in-depth discussions. So we've just shortened the coffee break a little bit. But I'm absolutely delighted with the sort of level of engagement. I've sort of been walking around a little bit, and it's been fantastic to hear. And I'm very excited to take away your ideas and what we can do as centres as well to help support you as well with that. So I just want to say a few very brief closing remarks, and just to thank our panellists once again for a very engaging session, the panel session. And thank you for your input as well as both online and in person. And after the coffee break, which is downstairs in the main room, we will be restarting at 11 AM, and that will be for the challenges to meeting net zero barriers and bottlenecks session. So we welcome you back up here for that. Okay, thank you very much.